The evening had settled softly over our quiet suburban street, the kind of calm that lulls you into believing nothing could disturb it. I sat curled on the couch, a book half forgotten in my lap, waiting for James to come home. It was a routine I had grown accustomed to, waiting for the familiar sound of his keys jingling at the door, the tired but warm smile greeting me as he stepped inside. Tonight, however, the silence stretched longer than usual, and my unease began to simmer beneath the surface. The clock ticked past 8, then 9, and still no sign of him. I picked up my phone to send a quick message, something light and teasing about working late again. Instead, my screen buzzed with an unexpected notification. A message from an unknown number. Curiosity prickled at me as I opened it, revealing a series of photos. My heart tightened as I scanned the images. James, but not as I knew him. He was seated at a small cafe table in the corner of a bustling city square, far from his office, laughing with a woman I didn't recognize. Their body language was intimate, their smiles easy and unguarded. It was a side of him I had never seen. Confusion rooted me to the spot. I stared at the screen, blinking as if the photos might rearrange themselves into an explanation I could understand. Was this some sort of mistake? A cruel joke? The rational part of me demanded answers, but another part whispered a darker suspicion. James had told me he was working late, buried in a project that had to be finished before the morning. Those words now felt like a lie echoing in an empty room. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. The woman's face was unfamiliar, but the warmth in James's eyes was unmistakable. I thought I knew every expression he wore, every smile reserved for me in the quiet moments of our life together. Yet here he was, sharing laughter with a stranger under the golden glow of street lamps, while I waited at home alone. My mind raced back over the last few weeks. The missed dinners, the hurried goodbyes, the faint scent of a perfume I couldn't place lingering on his collar. I had dismissed those signs as stress, exhaustion, the natural ebb and flow of our busy lives. But now, with these photos in my hand, denial crumbled like fragile glass. I put the phone down and ran my fingers through my hair, trying to steady the storm inside. The room felt suddenly oppressive, the walls closing in as I grappled with disbelief. How long had this been going on? How many times had he slipped away, leaving me with empty excuses and unanswered questions? I rose from the couch and paced the living room. The photos burned into my mind's eye. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat a reminder that the life I thought I had was unraveling in real time. I reached for the phone again, my fingers trembling as I considered calling James, demanding an explanation. But the fear of what his voice might say, or refuse to say, held me back. Instead, I stared out the window into the darkening street, searching for some thread of hope, some reason to believe this was all a terrible misunderstanding. But the truth felt heavier than the night air pressing against the glass. I am Emma Reynolds, 38 years old, a wife who believed in the quiet strength of love and trust. Tonight, those beliefs feel fragile, tested by an unexpected message that has turned my world upside down. I don't know what James will say when he comes home, or if he will come home at all, but I know I cannot ignore what I have seen. As I waited, the minutes dragged on, each one filled with a mixture of dread and determination. I had to find out the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The life we had built together was suddenly a question mark, and I was the only one with the answers. The night stretched on, thick with uncertainty and a growing weight that settled deep in my chest. I couldn't push the images from my mind, the way James's eyes crinkled at the corners as he laughed, the casual touch of the woman's hand resting lightly on his arm. The photos replayed in my thoughts like a haunting melody, each frame a note of betrayal I hadn't expected to hear. I sank back into the couch, my mind drifting to the weeks leading up to this moment. James had been different lately, though I had tried to convince myself it was nothing more than work stress. He was quieter at dinner, distracted during our conversations, often checking his phone with a furtive glance. There were the missed calls I couldn't explain, the vague excuses about late meetings and deadlines that seemed to multiply. At the time, I told myself that these were just the demands of his job, that things would settle once the project was finished. But now those moments took on a new, painful meaning. As I sat there, the quiet of the house felt oppressive, the walls closing in as suspicion gnawed at me. Who was this woman? How long had James been seeing her? The thought that he had been laughing with her, sharing moments I was never part of, twisted inside me like a cold knife. I realized I had been blind to the signs, wrapped up in my own routines and the comfortable facade of our marriage. My fingers trembled as I reached for the phone again, scrolling through old messages, searching for clues I might have missed. There were late-night texts from James, brief and clipped, often ending abruptly. I remembered the times he'd left the room to take calls in private, insisting it was work-related. Now those calls felt like echoes of deception. The woman in the photos appeared radiant, her smile genuine and unguarded, unlike the forced politeness I often saw in James's colleagues. Their body language spoke of familiarity and intimacy, a world I was not part of. I couldn't recognize her and the realization stung. This was a side of James that existed beyond the life we had built together. I felt a surge of anger mixed with sorrow. How had I been so naive? I had trusted him implicitly, believing that our years together meant something unbreakable. But trust, I now understood, was fragile, and secrets had begun to erode the foundation of our marriage. Despite the pain, I knew I couldn't let myself spiral into despair just yet. I needed answers, clarity amidst the chaos. I had to confront the reality of what was happening, before I allowed my emotions to dictate my next steps. For now, I resolved to hold on to the truth I had uncovered, to gather my strength for the difficult conversations ahead. I glanced at the clock, it was nearing 10. James was nowhere to be seen, and my phone remained silent. The house felt emptier than ever, the absence of his presence a tangible void. I tried to imagine what he might be doing, who he might be with, but the images from the photos overpowered every hopeful thought. In the quiet of the night, I allowed myself a moment of vulnerability. Tears welled in my eyes as I thought of the life we had shared, the plans made, the dreams whispered in the dark. I had believed in us, in the promises we had exchanged. Now those promises felt fragile, slipping through my fingers like grains of sand. But beneath the hurt, a flicker of resolve began to grow. I reminded myself that I deserved honesty, respect, and the truth, no matter how difficult it might be. I was not willing to be a bystander in my own life, to accept half-truths or silence. As dawn approached, I made a silent vow to myself. I would find the courage to face whatever lay ahead, to confront James and demand the answers I needed. I would no longer live in the shadows of doubt and suspicion. It was time to reclaim control, to understand the full story before deciding what came next. I am Emma Reynolds, a woman caught in the storm of betrayal, yet determined to navigate the turbulent waters with strength and clarity. Tonight, I stand at the precipice of change, ready to uncover the truth hidden beneath the surface of my marriage. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains, casting a pale glow over the living room where I sat, phone clutched tightly in my hand. Hours had passed since the photos arrived, and still no word from James. I swallowed the lump in my throat and pressed his name, watching the call edge toward voicemail before it slipped away unanswered. Again and again the same pattern repeated, calls ignored, messages left unanswered. Each unanswered call deepened the knot of anxiety coiling in my stomach. Why was he avoiding me? What was he hiding? The silence was a cruel companion, louder than any confession, more painful than any confrontation. I wanted to believe there was a reasonable explanation, some innocent story lurking beneath the surface. But the evidence in his silence whispered a different truth. My mind wrestled with the storm of emotions swirling inside me. Betrayal, confusion, fear, and a desperate need for clarity. I felt torn between the urge to confront him immediately and the paralyzing fear of what his answers might reveal. What if the truth was far worse than I imagined? What if this was just the beginning of a deeper unraveling? As the day wore on, I paced the house, phone in hand, waiting for any sign of contact. I tried to distract myself by scrolling through our old messages, searching for anything out of place. An unfamiliar name, a cryptic phrase, a hint of deception. Instead, I found fragments of our life together. Sweet good morning texts, plans for the weekend, mundane conversations about grocery lists and work deadlines. Those messages felt like relics from a past life, untouched by the current storm. In the midst of this turmoil, a second message arrived from the unknown number. My heart pounded as I opened it, bracing myself for whatever new revelations it might hold. The photos were clearer this time, James and the woman from before, caught in candid moments that spoke volumes. They were walking arm in arm through a park, sharing a private joke, their faces alight with a happiness I hadn't seen from James in months. Another image showed them sitting close at a dimly lit restaurant, leaning toward one another in a way that left no room for doubt. The images hit me harder than the first batch. They were undeniable proof of a secret world I had been shut out of. A world where James existed without me. The pain was sharp and immediate, but beneath it, a flicker of resolve ignited. I couldn't let this go unanswered. I reached out to my closest friend, Lisa, my voice barely steady as I explained the situation. She listened without judgment, offering a steady presence in the chaos. "Emma," she said gently, "you need to find out the truth for yourself. Don't let the silence eat away at you. Confront him when you're ready, but don't do it alone." Her words gave me courage, a reminder that I didn't have to face this alone. I spent the afternoon preparing myself for that inevitable confrontation, rehearsing questions, and imagining possible responses. The thought of facing James filled me with dread, but also a fierce determination to uncover the reality of our marriage. Despite my efforts to stay composed, moments of doubt crept in. Was I overreacting? Could there be an explanation that made sense? But each time I tried to convince myself otherwise, the photos and the unanswered calls pulled me back to the painful truth. Night fell again, and with it, a heavy silence that seemed to press down on the house. James still hadn't come home, and my phone remained stubbornly silent. The waiting was unbearable, each minute stretching endlessly as I grappled with the uncertainty. I sat by the window watching the world outside move on while my own life felt suspended in limbo. The woman in the photos haunted my thoughts, her presence a shadow over the life I thought I shared with James. I wondered who she was, what she meant to him, and how long this had been going on without my knowledge. I realized that the person I thought I knew was a stranger in some ways, and that realization cut deeper than any betrayal. The man who used to share my mornings and my dreams had been living a parallel life, one I was only now beginning to glimpse. Despite the pain, I found a strange clarity in the darkness. I wasn't going to let this situation define me or destroy me. I needed to face the truth, no matter how difficult, and decide what came next. I am Emma Reynolds, caught between love and betrayal, between hope and heartbreak. Tonight, I stand on the edge of a confrontation that I cannot avoid, armed with the painful knowledge of James's secret and the fragile strength to demand the truth. The weight of the past weeks pressed heavily on me as I sat alone in the dim light of our living room, the photos from the unknown sender still glowing on my phone. Each image was a reminder of the distance James had created between us, not just in miles or moments but in trust and truth. I found myself retracing the timeline, piecing together fragments of memory that now took on new, unsettling significance. James had been working overtime with increasing frequency, or so he said. I remembered the late-night dinners left untouched on the table, his hurried excuses about meetings that dragged on, and the way he'd sometimes return home with a tired smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. At the time, I had chalked it up to stress, deadlines, the ebb and flow of corporate life. But now those explanations felt hollow, shadows cast to mask a deeper secret. I thought back to the subtle changes, the way his phone was suddenly always face down, the quick glances he shot when I entered the room, the hushed conversations cut short when I approached. It was as though he had been building a wall between us, brick by brick, and I had been too blind or too hopeful to see it. The realization stung sharply. James had been deliberately keeping me in the dark, weaving a web of lies that stretched back weeks, maybe months. The woman in the photos was no mere acquaintance but a presence he had hidden from me. A secret life unfolding parallel to our own. I felt a rush of anger, not just at him, but at myself for missing the signs. How had I allowed this distance to grow without questioning it more deeply? The betrayal was compounded by the knowledge that I had been an outsider to his truth, a bystander to the moments he shared with someone else. The stranger who had sent the photos became an unexpected ally in this painful revelation. Whoever they were, they had exposed the reality I was forced to face. A reality where James's affections were divided, where the life we had built together was fractured by deceit. I sat back, the images swirling in my mind, each one a silent accusation. It was no longer a question of if but when and why. The answers I sought were tangled in the days and weeks I had overlooked, in the promises unkept and the secrets concealed. Despite the turmoil, a flicker of resolve ignited within me. I could no longer afford to be passive, to let silence and shadows define my marriage. I needed to confront this hidden chapter, to demand honesty from the man I thought I knew. I reached for my phone once more, composing a message to Lisa, my closest friend, who had become my sounding board and support. Her steady voice had reminded me that I was not alone, that strength could be found even in the darkest moments. James has been meeting this woman for weeks. He's kept it all from me. I typed, my hand steady despite the storm inside. I need to know everything. I can't live in this shadow anymore. Lisa's reply came swiftly, a balm to my frayed nerves. You're doing the right thing, Emma. When you're ready, face him. The truth will hurt, but it will also set you free. Her words echoed in the quiet room, a reminder that clarity and courage were the first steps toward healing. As night deepened, I prepared myself for the confrontation ahead. I thought about the questions I would ask, the truths I needed to hear, no matter how painful. The woman in the photos was no longer a mystery but a symbol of the breach between us. A breach I was determined to understand and address. I am Emma Reynolds, standing at the crossroads of betrayal and truth, ready to face the hidden life James has led. This chapter is dark and uncertain, but within it lies the possibility of revelation and perhaps a path forward. Tonight, I hold the pieces of a fractured trust, and I am resolved to uncover the full story behind the silence. The hours before James's return felt stretched thin, like the fragile thread of a web ready to snap. I sat on the edge of the bed, hands clenched tightly in my lap, heart pounding with a mixture of dread and determination. Tonight I would confront him, not with accusations born of anger, but with the calm resolve of someone who needed answers, no matter how painful. I had spent the afternoon reaching out to Lisa again, her voice a steady anchor in the storm. You have to prepare yourself, Emma, she said gently. Know what you want to say, but also be ready for whatever his response might be. You deserve the truth, but you also deserve to protect yourself. I took her words to heart, scribbling notes in the quiet of my study, questions I needed to ask, boundaries I wouldn't allow to be crossed, the lines I needed to draw for my own peace of mind. The woman in the photos was no longer just a shadow lurking in the background. She was a tangible presence that demanded confrontation. As I rehearsed what I would say, a kaleidoscope of emotions swirled inside me. Fear of the unknown, the sting of betrayal, but also a flicker of courage I hadn't realized I possessed. I reminded myself that this was not just about uncovering James's secrets. It was about reclaiming my own voice and agency. I called my sister Claire too. Her steady, no-nonsense advice reminded me that I didn't have to face this alone. You're stronger than you think, Emma, she said. And no matter what happens, you have people who love you and will stand by you. The house felt heavy with anticipation as the evening deepened. The faint hum of the city outside was a distant backdrop to the quiet storm building within these walls. Every creak, every rustle made my heart leap, waiting for the sound of his key in the lock, the moment when the fragile balance would shift. Time seemed to warp, minutes dragging like hours until finally the front door opened. James stepped inside, his expression tired but unremarkable at first glance. But I saw past the surface, past the familiar line of his jaw, the way his shoulders slumped with exhaustion. I saw the truth beneath, the secret he had carried too long. I took a steadying breath and met his eyes. James, I began, voice steady despite the storm inside. We need to talk. His eyes flickered with surprise, then something else, guilt perhaps or regret. He nodded slowly, setting down his briefcase and removing his coat with deliberate calm. I didn't give him a chance to speak first. I know about the woman, I said, holding up my phone, the photos glaring between us like an unspoken accusation. I've seen the pictures, James. I know you've been meeting her for weeks. His face paled, the color draining away as the weight of my words sank in. For a moment he was silent, the room filled with the sound of our breathing. Then, almost reluctantly, he spoke. Emma, I didn't mean for you to find out like this. The admission was like a crack in a dam, the floodgates of truth beginning to open. I listened as he stumbled through explanations, excuses, half-truths woven with regret. The woman was someone from work, a distraction he hadn't planned to let grow into something more. He claimed confusion, loneliness, mistakes made in a moment of weakness. But beneath his words I sensed the deeper fractures, commitments broken, trust shattered, a marriage teetering on the edge. I held my ground, refusing to be swept away by apologies or pleas for forgiveness. I need to understand everything, James, I said firmly. Not just the what, but the why. How long has this been going on? What does it mean for us? The conversation stretched into the night, a painful unraveling of secrets and silences. Each revelation was a blow, but also a step toward clarity. I realized that while the truth hurt, living in ignorance was no longer an option. Throughout it all, I stayed grounded, reminding myself that this confrontation was not about winning or losing, but about reclaiming my place in my own life. I was no longer willing to be sidelined, no longer willing to accept half-truths as a substitute for honesty. When the conversation finally quieted, exhaustion settled over us both. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with difficult decisions and fragile emotions, but at least the veil had been lifted. I am Emma Reynolds, a woman forced to face the harsh light of betrayal, yet determined to stand tall and demand the truth. Tonight was not the end, but the beginning of a journey toward understanding, and perhaps healing. James's footsteps echoed softly through the hallway as he entered the house, the familiar creak of the front door closing behind him, a sound I had once found comforting. Tonight, however, every noise felt magnified, charged with the tension that had been building between us for days. I stood in the living room, arms crossed, my heart pounding as I prepared myself for the confrontation that could no longer be delayed. His eyes met mine, flickering with a mixture of surprise and unease. "Emma," he began, voice hesitant, "I didn't expect you to be awake." I held my ground, refusing to let the moment slip away. "We need to talk," I said, my tone calm but resolute. I reached for my phone and placed it on the coffee table between us, screen facing upward. The photos were there, the proof of his secret life glaring back at him. For a moment, James's expression hardened, his lips pressed into a thin line as he stared at the images. Then, almost imperceptibly, his shoulders sagged, and the mask of denial began to crumble. I can explain," he stammered, taking a step closer. I raised a hand, stopping him. "Don't. Not yet." My voice was steady, but beneath it lay the storm of emotions I had been holding at bay: hurt, betrayal, disbelief. "I've seen the photos, James. The late nights, the secret meetings. Why didn't you tell me?" He looked away, swallowing hard. "I was scared. I didn't want to hurt you." "By lying to me?" The words cut through the silence like a blade. "I trusted you. I believed in us." James's gaze dropped to the floor, shame coloring his features. "I made a mistake. It started as something small, but I got caught up. I never meant for it to go this far." The calmness in my voice surprised even me as I replied, "Mistakes don't last for weeks, James. They don't grow into a secret life." He swallowed, then met my eyes again, the vulnerability raw and unguarded. "I know. I'm sorry. I wish I could take it back." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I need to know the truth. Not just the surface, James. How long has this been going on? What does she mean to you?" His answer came slowly, words heavy with regret. "A few months. It started as a distraction, something to fill the gaps when I felt alone. But it became more complicated than I ever wanted. I felt a pang of sorrow, not just for the betrayal, but for the man who seemed lost in his own mistakes. Yet, beneath that sorrow was a growing resolve. We need to decide what this means for us. I can't pretend this isn't happening." James nodded, exhaustion etched into his features. "I understand. I want to fix this if you'll let me." The weight of his words hung between us, a fragile bridge over the chasm his actions had created. I knew the road ahead would be difficult, filled with difficult conversations and painful decisions. But for now, the veil had been lifted, and the truth, however painful, was finally out in the open. I am Emma Reynolds, standing face to face with the man I thought I knew, grappling with the unraveling of our life together. Tonight, the lies have been exposed, and the first steps toward reckoning have begun. James's confession hung heavy in the air, a fragile thread connecting us amid the wreckage of broken trust. The night had stretched long, the shadows in our living room deepening as he peeled back layers of deception that had once seemed impenetrable. His voice, tinged with remorse, revealed more than just the affair. It exposed the cracks in our marriage I had been blind to, the unspoken grievances and growing distance that had quietly festered beneath the surface. He spoke of guilt that gnawed at him, of loneliness that crept in during long evenings when I was absorbed in work or caught up with friends. The woman was not just a fleeting distraction. She had become a refuge, a place where he found comfort and understanding he felt was lacking at home. Each admission was a blow, yet also a key to understanding the unraveling of the life we had built. As he unraveled the tangled web, I felt a storm of emotions: hurt, anger, sadness, but also a strange clarity. The man before me was flawed but human, struggling with mistakes and consequences no one was immune to. Yet the betrayal was real, and the pain undeniable. Our families and closest friends soon became entangled in the fallout. When I confided in my sister Claire, her shock was tempered by unwavering support. "Emma, you didn't deserve this. But remember, you're not alone." Her words were a balm, even as whispers began to ripple through our social circle. Friends took sides, some offering sympathy, others questioning what had led to this fracture. The once tight-knit community around us subtly shifted, conversations laced with curiosity and judgment. I felt exposed, vulnerable under the weight of scrutiny, but also resolute not to let their opinions dictate my path. James's closest friends were divided as well. Some urged him to fight for our marriage, others counseled resignation. The tension seeped into gatherings that once felt warm and familiar, leaving behind a residue of discomfort and unspoken questions. Through it all, I grappled with the conflicting loyalties inside me. The love that had once bound us, the betrayal that now threatened to sever that bond, and the uncertain future that stretched ahead. I sought solace in quiet moments, journaling my thoughts and emotions, trying to make sense of the chaos. Therapy became a refuge, a space where I could confront the pain without judgment. It was there I began to untangle the complex feelings of hurt and hope, betrayal and forgiveness. Each session chipped away at the walls I had built, revealing a resilience I hadn't known I possessed. James attended sessions too, tentative but willing. We navigated the fragile terrain of rebuilding trust, confronting uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our relationship. The process was arduous, marked by setbacks and breakthroughs. I realized that loyalty was not a simple matter of standing by someone no matter what. It was about honesty, respect, and the courage to face the truth, even when it was painful. My loyalty to myself became paramount, a guiding light through the darkness. Friends who had once been distant now stepped closer, offering support without judgment. Their presence reminded me that while betrayal isolated me, connection could heal. I began to surround myself with those who uplifted rather than questioned, who saw me as more than the circumstances of my husband's choices. As the weeks passed, I noticed a subtle shift within myself. The pain remained, but a new strength emerged, a confidence born of survival and self-awareness. I was no longer the woman defined by James's betrayal, but one reclaiming her identity and future. The journey was far from over, the road ahead uncertain. But amid the unraveling, I found fragments of hope, moments where the possibility of healing flickered like a distant star. I am Emma Reynolds, navigating the turbulent aftermath of lies and lost trust, learning that the path forward demands courage, self-love, and the willingness to face the unknown. The ties that bind us are complex, but so too is the strength to rebuild or to walk away on our own terms. The days that followed James's confession were a whirlwind of emotions and shifting realities. Word of the affair spread through our social circle with a relentless momentum, carried on whispered conversations and sidelong glances. Suddenly, the life I had known was punctuated by the judgment and sympathy of others, a complex mix that left me feeling both exposed and isolated. At social gatherings, I became a subject of quiet speculation. Friends I had once laughed with over coffee now offered cautious condolences or awkward silences. Some avoided me altogether, unsure how to navigate the delicate terrain of betrayal and heartbreak. The support I received was often tinged with pity, a reminder that my private pain had become public knowledge. Family dinners grew tense, with relatives unsure whether to address the elephant in the room or pretend it didn't exist. I felt like a fragile secret, something to be handled delicately yet inevitably discussed behind closed doors. It was a strange and lonely position, caught between the desire for privacy and the reality of being thrust into the spotlight. Amid this social upheaval, I realized I needed more than sympathetic words. I needed to heal. I sought out therapy, a sanctuary where I could confront the swirling emotions without fear of judgment. The sessions were raw and challenging, forcing me to face not only James's betrayal, but also my own feelings of inadequacy and self-doubt. In those quiet rooms, I began to unravel the tangled threads of pain and anger, fear and hope. I learned to recognize the ways betrayal had chipped away at my self-worth, and to rebuild the foundation of my identity. The process was neither quick nor easy. Some days the weight of grief threatened to overwhelm me, while others brought small victories of clarity and strength. Therapy also offered tools to navigate the complex emotions that came with forgiveness, not necessarily for James but for myself. I realized that holding on to resentment was a chain, and letting go was a form of liberation. It was about reclaiming my narrative, refusing to be defined solely by his mistakes. As I worked through my emotions, I noticed a subtle shift in how I carried myself. The woman who once questioned her worth began to stand taller, speak with more confidence, and reclaim spaces that had felt off-limits. I started reconnecting with friends who uplifted me, surrounding myself with voices that reinforced my strength rather than my pain. James, too, attended therapy sessions, tentatively stepping into the same space of healing. Our conversations became more honest, stripped of the defenses that had once kept us apart. We explored the roots of our fractured marriage, confronting uncomfortable truths about ourselves and each other. The journey was far from linear. There were setbacks and moments of doubt, times when the past threatened to overshadow the fragile progress we had made. But beneath it all, a new foundation was forming, a commitment to honesty, self-awareness, and mutual respect. Through it all, I grappled with the social consequences of our unraveling. Some friends drifted away, unable to reconcile the image of the man they knew with the reality of his actions. Others drew closer, offering unwavering support without judgment. Their presence was a balm, a reminder that connection could heal wounds that betrayal had opened. I realized that healing was not a solitary endeavor, but a journey supported by community, self-reflection, and courage. Each day brought a step forward, a choice to embrace resilience over despair. I am Emma Reynolds, navigating the turbulent waters of betrayal and recovery, learning that pain can be transformed into strength, and that the path to self-worth is paved with honesty, forgiveness, and hope. The future remains uncertain, but I face it with a heart renewed and a spirit unbroken. The weight of the past months pressed heavily as I sat across from the attorney's polished desk, the sterile office a stark contrast to the turmoil churning inside me. I was here not just to understand the legal ramifications of James's betrayal, but to begin mapping out the uncertain future that stretched before me. The papers in front of me, documents outlining separation, custody, and asset division, felt both foreign and necessary, symbols of a life unraveling. The lawyer's voice was calm, methodical, explaining the options available, the protections I could secure, and the steps required to safeguard my interests. Prenups, property rights, custody arrangements. All words that once seemed irrelevant now carried immense weight. I listened intently, absorbing the details, knowing that every decision here would ripple through the rest of my life. But beyond the legalities, I grappled with the emotional decisions that loomed just as large. Could I forgive? Could we rebuild what had been broken? Or was it time to accept that some wounds ran too deep? The questions lingered unresolved, demanding answers I wasn't yet ready to give. James reached out, seeking forgiveness with a sincerity that both comforted and unsettled me. His apologies were earnest, his desire to make amends clear in his every word. But I had learned that forgiveness was not a simple gift to be handed over lightly. It was a process, one that required time, trust, and genuine change. "I want to try," he said one evening, voice trembling with hope. "I don't want to lose us." I looked at him, seeing the man who had betrayed me and the man who now sought redemption. "I need boundaries, James," I replied firmly. "I need honesty and respect. And I need time to heal." Setting those boundaries was both empowering and painful. It meant acknowledging the fractures in our marriage without pretending they didn't exist. It meant recognizing my own worth and refusing to be swept aside by guilt or obligation. We talked late into the nights, navigating the fragile terrain of rebuilding or parting ways. The conversations were raw, honest, and sometimes heartbreaking. Yet, in those moments I found clarity not about what the future held but about what I deserved. I began to embrace the independence that had once felt distant, reclaiming parts of myself that had been overshadowed by the betrayal. I reconnected with passions and dreams I had set aside, fueled by a newfound determination to live authentically. Despite the uncertainty, I felt a growing sense of acceptance. Whatever path I chose, whether toward reconciliation or separation, it would be one forged from truth and self-respect. I am Emma Reynolds, standing at a crossroads shaped by heartbreak and hope, learning that the decisions we make in our darkest hours define not just our relationships, but our very selves. The journey ahead is uncertain, but I face it with a resolve born of pain, courage, and the unwavering belief that I deserve a life built on honesty and respect. I stood at the threshold of a new chapter, the echoes of betrayal still lingering but no longer defining who I was. The journey from shattered trust to self-empowerment had been arduous, marked by painful truths and quiet revelations. Yet, through it all, I had rediscovered a strength that had lain dormant beneath the weight of deception. In the months since confronting James, I had taken tentative steps toward rebuilding my life on my own terms. I returned to passions I had shelved, writing, mentoring, and financial consulting, using my professional expertise to help others navigate the complexities of personal and financial upheaval. Each client I guided, each story I heard, became a testament to resilience and the power of reclaiming one's narrative. The business I started was more than a career. It was a declaration of independence, a way to transform my pain into purpose. I found fulfillment in empowering women to face their own challenges, to understand their worth, and to take control of their futures. Amelia, my daughter, became my steadfast supporter, her belief in me a constant source of strength. Reflecting on the photos that had once shattered my world, I now saw them not as symbols of loss, but as catalysts for transformation. That unexpected message, the moment my life shifted, had set in motion a journey of self-discovery and renewal. It was painful, yes, but also necessary. The envelope I had handed to James that night, containing divorce papers carefully prepared with legal counsel, was no longer just a step toward ending a marriage. It was a key to unlocking a future defined by honesty, self-respect, and freedom. While the divorce proceedings unfolded, I focused on building a life that honored my values and aspirations. Friends who had stood by me throughout became pillars of my new world, their unwavering support a reminder that I was never truly alone. I cultivated relationships grounded in authenticity, surrounding myself with people who lifted me rather than weighed me down. The final hearing fell on what would have been our 29th anniversary, a poignant marker of the life we once dreamed of. As I sat in the courtroom, I felt a calm resolve. The judge's ruling upheld the prenup, secured my financial stability, and granted me the family home. James's choices had consequences, and I was ready to face the future without fear. Looking ahead, I embraced the uncertainty with open arms. The pain of betrayal had forged a new identity, one rooted in resilience, clarity, and empowerment. I was no longer the woman defined by someone else's actions, but the architect of my own destiny. I am Emma Reynolds, a woman transformed by adversity, who turned the darkest moment into a beacon of hope. The envelope was more than a legal document. It was the beginning of my reinvention. In reclaiming my financial future, I reclaimed myself, and with that, the freedom to live a life true to who I am. If you loved the story, like the video and subscribe.